Welcome to the wild world of Wizard West. If you've ever wanted to experience a fusion of magic and the Wild West, this Roblox game is the place to be. But let me tell you, it's not just about casting spells and looking cool. Wizard West is fiercely competitive. If you're aiming to reach the top and stay there, you'll need more than just a flashy wand. You've got to build the perfect spell loadout. That's right, choosing the right combination of spells is crucial to surviving the tough, magical duels that await in this game. But don't worry, I've got you covered with our ultimate Wizard West spell tier list. In today's video, we'll break down which spells are absolutely essential for climbing to the top and which ones might leave you in the dust. We've tested out all the spells, from the basic ones to the more advanced, so you don't have to waste time figuring out what works. Whether you're a newbie just starting out or a seasoned player looking to refine your strategy, this guide will help you make those tough decisions. Stick around as we dive into the best spell combos, and trust me, this will change how you play Wizard West forever. I'm quickly moving on to the video and I'm ranking spells in Wizard West. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of tier list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching.
A very small portion of the audience is subscribed to the channel. Please don't forget to subscribe if you like these types of videos. Thanks.
The spells in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Episkios, Expulso, Stupendo, Lasso, Metrificus, Lumo, and Revelio. Alright, let's get into it. Today we're diving into some of the D tier spells in Wizard West, and I gotta tell you, these aren't the ones you want to be casting if you're aiming for greatness, but hey, let's talk about them anyway, because knowing what not to use is just as important as knowing what to go for, right? First up, we've got Episkios. It's a healing bolt, which sounds nice in theory, but in practice, not so much. It heals one target for a very low amount, and honestly, if you're looking to heal, you're better off picking a damage spell and just hoping for the best. I mean, if you're gonna risk your life casting a spell, at least make it worth your while, right? Then there's Expulso. It's an okay-ish utility spell in PvP that disarms your opponent for a short time. But here's the thing, there are better ways to disable your enemy. A good stun skill can change the game in ways that Expulso just can't. It's fine if you've got nothing else, but when it comes to serious PvP, it's on the borderline of useless. And don't even think about trying it in PvE. Yeah, it's not gonna do you any favors. Now, Stupendo. This one sounds like it should be fun, right? A bolt that stuns and auto-tracks? Pretty cool. But here's the catch, it only stuns for a short time. On top of that, it only applies its lasso effect when the enemy is already low on HP, so you're better off just casting something that stuns longer or deals more damage. It's good in specific situations, but those are rare. Speaking of lasso, we've got the next spell that might make you scratch your head. It completely immobilizes an enemy on hit, super strong in PvP, but in PvE, not as much. If you're up against mobs, this spell's like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. It's a cool trick in duels though, just don't expect it to carry you through any dungeons. Let's talk about Metrificus, a spell that shoots out sparks to briefly stun nearby enemies. The problem here is simple, it has very low range and doesn't do much damage. There are better stun spells that actually serve a purpose, so don't waste your time with this one unless you're trying to look cool while not doing anything useful. Then we've got Lumo. You know that feeling when a spell is so useless, you wonder if it was even meant to be in the game? That's Lumo in a nutshell. It just emits a light from your wand. That's it. No effects, no damage, just light. Maybe it's useful if you're trying to create a cool ambience, but it definitely won't help you out in battle. And lastly, Revelio. Ah yes, the spell that reveals objects and creatures around you. But let's be real, it's basically like having a flashlight in a dungeon. It doesn't add much value unless you really need to know where things are. And even then, you're probably better off just using your eyes. So there you have it folks, these are some of the D tier spells in Wizard West. They might have their moments, but for the most part, you're better off looking elsewhere if you want to level up your wizard game. Stay tuned for more breakdowns, and remember, knowing what not to cast is half the battle. The spells in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Abracadabra, Protego, Episkio Magna, Electrificus, Aquasia, Episkio, Vocaralea, Vora Pickaxe, and Haste. Alright, let's dive straight into the wild and wonderful world of C tier spells in Wizard West. You know, the ones that aren't exactly top tier, but still have their uses if you can make them work. Trust me, these spells have a lot of potential, but they need some extra TLC to really shine. First up, we've got Abracadabra. This one's a real showstopper in PvP, instantly taking out your enemies with a single cast. It's like pulling out the big guns at the perfect moment. But, and there's always a but, right? It's not the best when it comes to PvE, and that long cooldown, yeah, it can leave you hanging when you need it most. Still, if you're looking to dominate in PvP, this spell can be a game changer. Then there's Protego. This is your trusty shield against all the incoming spells. It's got great utility in PvP since it can block spells for a solid amount of time. Plus, the cooldown isn't terrible, and the barrier lasts for a nice duration. But in PvE, not so much. You're probably better off with a damage spell for those intense battles. Now, if you're into healing, let's talk about Episkio Magna. It's a solid AoE heal for everyone in close proximity, which is pretty handy when you're surrounded by enemies. The catch? You've got to be up close and personal with your team, so it's a bit risky if you're not careful. Sometimes, opting for a damage spell can do more for your team than a heal that's limited by range. Electrificus is next, and it's like a mini lightning bolt that shoots instantly from your wand. It's got a super short cooldown, which is always a plus, and the ragdoll effect on enemies? Hilarious. But here's the thing, while it's a fun little zap, the AoE and damage aren't exactly impressive. It's a bit of a hit or miss spell depending on the situation. Aquasia is a cool spell that traps enemies in a water bubble while dealing damage. It's got a relatively short cooldown and offers great crowd control, especially early on in the game. However, the damage is on the low side, so unless you're looking for some extra CC, you might want to focus on spells that hit harder. Speaking of healing, Episkio is the more modest cousin of Episkio Magna. It only heals the caster, which is nice for self-sustain but doesn't do much for your teammates. While it can keep you in the fight a little longer, it's definitely not the top choice when you could be casting a damage spell instead. Sorry Episkio, we love you, but damage is a king. Now, Versatility is an armor conjuring spell that gives your character some extra health. It's a solid PvP utility tool, especially if you're trying to tank some damage. The issue here is that it doesn't provide much value in PvE, and honestly, Protego just does a better job of keeping you safe. Still, if you're in a tough spot, Versatility can come through for you. Lastly, Vocaria Pickaxe, because hey, sometimes you just need to mine some ore. It's perfect for gathering resources, but that's about all it's good for. You won't be using this one in combat anytime soon, but if you're out there farming for materials, this pickaxe will save your day. And then there's Haste. It boosts both your movement and casting speed, which sounds awesome, right? It's a solid utility spell, but here's the catch. When you're in the heat of battle, you probably prefer a damage spell over a speed boost. Still, it's handy if you're trying to move around faster or cast your spells a little quicker. So there you have it, folks. The C tier spells in Wizard West aren't bad. They've just got a few quirks that make them less viable in certain situations, but if you know when and how to use them, they can still be pretty handy in the right hands. The spells in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Ignitium, Inlesis, Glacilancia, Defindo, Ignicio, Ignis, Glacius, and Vogue Halberda. Alright, let's dive into some of the B tier spells in Wizard West, the ones that are kinda cool but could really use a little more firepower to reach their full potential. Some of these might make you scratch your head and wonder why they're not higher up on the tier list, so let's break them down. First up, we've got Ignitium, the fiery little bombshell. It hurls a massive fireball that explodes on impact and sets everything ablaze. The AoE, area of effect, is pretty decent, which is always fun to watch, but the damage is a bit underwhelming. I mean, Bombarda just steals the spotlight when it comes to raw power. Still, if you're looking to light up a crowd and don't mind a little less punch, this one's worth a try. Then there's Inlesis, our stormy friend. This one calls down lightning from the heavens to strike at a target location, stunning and ragdolling nearby enemies. The AoE is solid and the crowd control is pretty fun, especially when you see enemies flopping around like ragdolls. The downside, it can be a pain to aim and the damage is pretty low. It's like a flashy lightning show with a little less oomph. Next, let's talk about Glacilancia, the icy sharpshooter. This spell fires several ice spears that auto-track the target. Sounds cool, right? It's got great single target damage, but there's a catch. The auto-tracking isn't as reliable as you'd hope. It's like watching a hunter trying to aim in a snowstorm. You get some hits, but a lot of them miss. And don't even think about using this for AoE damage. It's all about that single target focus. And now let's get sharp with Defindo. This one fires a horizontal piercing bolt that can hit multiple enemies in its path. The range is fantastic and it has a short cooldown, so you can dish out the damage pretty quickly. The only catch, you need to have good aim. It's like a sniper spell, but if you can't hit your targets, it's not going to do much for you. A little practice and you'll be zipping through mobs in no time. On to something a little more basic, Ignicio. This one shoots a wide cone-shaped flame from your wand. It's got a short cooldown and does okay-ish AoE damage, but let's be real, its range is super limited. It's great if you're up close and personal with enemies, but don't expect to be setting anything on fire from a distance. It's like the friendly neighborhood flamethrower, but with a low range and low impact. Let's not forget Ignis, a classic. This one fires a small bolt that sets enemies on fire on hit. It's got a tiny AoE, low damage, and requires some decent aim to really get the most out of it. If you're aiming for a slow burn, pun intended, it works, but don't expect to clear out a whole wave of enemies with this little guy. Next on the list, we have Glacius, the chill spell. It fires at a small tracking bolt that applies the chill status effect, slowing enemies down. The auto tracking is nice, and the low cooldown makes it a bit spammable, but the damage is so low that you'll be more focused on slowing down your enemies than actually dealing any significant harm. It's a nice utility spell, but not the kind of spell you bring to a fight expecting to pack a punch. Last but certainly not least, we've got Vocare Halberda. This one conjures up a halberd weapon, allowing you to wade into the battle yourself. It's got knockback and ragdolls enemies on hit, which is always satisfying to watch. However, the range is super short, and it only hits a few enemies at a time, so don't expect to wipe out a mob with it. It's fun for a melee touch, but as a spell, it's more of a gimmick than a powerhouse. So there you have it, some of the B tier spells in Wizard West. They're fun, flashy, and useful in the right situations, but they just can't compete with the heavy hitters. Keep these in your spellbook for specific moments, but don't count on them to be your main go-to when you need to bring the heat. The spells in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Oceanus Vortico, Frigidus, Vocare Machinum, Vocare Enarma, Bombardas, and Bolt. Alright, so today we're diving into some of the most powerful yet tricky spells in Wizard West. And let me tell you, if you're looking to wreak some chaos in both PvE and PvP, these spells are for you, though they come with their own unique quirks. Let's kick things off with Oceanus Vortico. This spell summons massive waves that trap your enemies in bubbles. Sounds like fun, right? And it is, especially if you're looking to crowd control. It's got an enormous area of effect, which means you can catch tons of enemies at once. But yeah, don't expect it to dish out high damage. It's more of a utility spell, and with a pretty long execution time, it's not a quick hit and run kind of thing. Still, if you're trying to lock down a group of enemies, this is one of the best in the game. Now, speaking of crowd control, let's talk about Frigidus. This one is a little colder, quite literally, because it conjures a vortex that constantly slows and freezes your enemies. The area of effect, gigantic. The duration, long enough to keep those enemies locked down while you and your team do some damage. The cooldown, pretty short so you can spam it when necessary, but you guessed it, just like Oceanus, the damage is practically non-existent. It's all about freezing and slowing to control the flow of the battle, which is awesome for both PvP and PvE scenarios. Just don't expect to melt faces with it. Now, you might have noticed a spell that seems similar, Vocare Machinum. Yes, it's basically Frigidus, but with a slightly cooler name, though it does the exact same thing. Huge area of effect, good control over the battlefield with freezing and slowing enemies, and a long-lasting duration. It's as reliable as they come, but again, damage isn't what this spell is known for. Still, it's perfect when you're coordinating with your team to keep enemies locked down for just long enough to unleash something nastier. Switching gears a bit, let's talk about something that does pack a punch. Vocare Enarma. This spell summons a rifle weapon for you. Yes, a rifle. We're talking about insane damage output, and we're also talking about a pretty fantastic range and projectile speed. It's basically your go-to for blasting enemies from a distance. But there's a catch, it requires solid aim. If you can't hit your target, you'll miss out on that massive damage, so be prepared to channel your inner sharpshooter. If you're not the greatest marksman, well, this spell might be a bit of a struggle. Moving on, let's check out Bombarda. If you love explosions, this one's for you. You create a massive explosion at a target location, followed by a few smaller explosions for good measure. This spell has solid AoE damage, and trust me, knocking enemies up and ragdolling them is as fun as it sounds. Plus, it has a super short cooldown, meaning you can throw it out pretty frequently. However, and there's always a however, you'll need to be spot on with your aim. If you miss, you might not get the full effect of the explosion. So yeah, aim carefully, or you'll be left holding a dud. Next up is Bolt. This spell channels and fires small tracking bolts at your target. It's a great way to dish out consistent damage without having to stand still too long. Short cooldown? Yup. Solid damage? You bet. But the catch, the channel time's not the shortest, so if you're not paying attention, you might find yourself vulnerable while casting. It's a great skill for people who can time their attacks well, but if you're more of a run and gun kind of player, this could be a little tricky to master. And that's the wild world of these A tier spells. They all have their strengths, no doubt. But like any powerful tool, they require a little bit of finesse. Whether you're looking to freeze, shoot, or explode your way to victory, these spells can definitely help turn the tide of battle. But remember, the key to mastering them is understanding their weaknesses and timing them just right. The spells in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Tempestia Incarnata, Imperium, Mors Mortem, and Apparat. Alright, buckle up, because we're diving deep into some of the wildest and most insane spells in Wizard West. And trust me, we're not talking about your average fireball or shield here, no. Today, we're all about those top tier S-rank spells that completely flip the game on its head. Let's kick things off with Tempestia Incarnata, the absolute beast of the storm clouds. This bad boy creates a massive storm that just rains down non-stop lightning strikes on your enemies. And we're not talking a little zap here and there. This is continuous auto-tracking damage that covers a huge area. It's like calling in your own personal thunderstorm. Of course, it does have a major catch. The cooldown is pretty brutal, meaning you can't spam it as much as you'd like. But when it's up, oh boy, watch out. Next up, we've got Imperium. This is the kind of spell that makes you feel like an evil genius. You can literally turn an enemy into an NPC that fights on your side. I mean, how sick is that? Imagine taking down one of the strongest players only to have them join your team. This one's a game changer for both PvE and PvP. The effect lasts a long time too, giving you plenty of time to wreak havoc. But yeah, it's got a pretty hefty cooldown, so you'll have to use it wisely. Timing is everything. Now, let's talk about Mors Mortem. If you love the idea of having some shady support, this spell's for you. You summon 3 shadow wizards that assist you in battle, and their damage is no joke. We're talking some serious firepower here, whether you're taking on mobs in PvE or fighting other players in PvP. It's a spell that's as deadly as it is cool. The only downside, the cooldown is painfully long, so you can't just keep spamming these shadowy allies. But when they show up, they mean business. And then there's Apparate, the go-to teleportation spell for any wizard who just wants to avoid trouble or create it from a distance. Need to get out of a sticky situation? Poof, you're gone. It's like having your own personal escape button. Plus, you can use it to move around the map with ease, whether it's to avoid a deadly fight or get into the perfect position. The only problem is that it has a long cooldown, so don't expect to use it every time you need a getaway. You've got to plan your escapes carefully. Now, here's the thing about all these S-tier spells. They're absolute game changers, but they're not for the faint of heart. They have long cooldowns for a reason. They're powerful as heck, but you've got to use them wisely. Think of them as the ultimate power-ups that can turn the tide of battle in an instant, but only if you know when and how to unleash them. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? These spells are the cream of the crop in Wizard West, offering insane power and utility. But like any good wizard knows, power comes with a price. The key to mastering these spells lies in their timing and knowing when to strike. Whether you're summoning storms, controlling enemies, or teleporting across the map, each of these spells brings something unique to the table. So go ahead, embrace the chaos, and let these S-tier spells work their magic. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.